Long before modern borders were drawn, before the world had even witnessed the splendor of Rome or the philosophical brilliance of Greece, there lay, east of Mesopotamia, a vast land rich in contrasts, where deserts and mountains coexisted with fertile plains and hidden valleys. There, in the heart of the Iranian plateau, the foundations would be laid for one of the most influential civilizations of antiquity, Persia. But before it rose as an empire, that region was inhabited by peoples who, silently and steadily, were already weaving a network of exchanges, ideas, and migrations that would gradually give rise to the first organized trade routes. Long before the rise of the Achaemenids, the people of ancient Elam, one of the region's earliest kingdoms, with its capital in Susa, had already established relations with Mesopotamia. Sumerian inscriptions mention the Elamites as frequent trade partners, exchanging mineral resources, precious stones, and works of art with cities such as Ur, Lagash, and Nippur. These early contacts were not merely transactions, they were cultural bridges linking distant worlds, revealing that trade, from its very beginnings, was also a force of integration and transformation. Though the region's terrain may seem hostile at first glance, it hid a strategic secret. It was a natural corridor between East and West, between the Caucasus and the Indian Ocean, between the Indian subcontinent and the Fertile Crescent. Mountains like the Zagros Range and deserts like the Lut imposed great challenges, but also guided travelers along defined paths, routes that, over time, would be used by caravans, messengers, merchants, and even armies. Along these trails, first carved by nomadic shepherds and small trading clans, the outlines of routes that would later sustain an empire were formed. It was in this very setting that the Medes and Persians emerged, two Indo-European peoples who migrated to the Iranian plateau around the second millennium BCE. Initially divided into tribes, they coexisted with other local ethnic groups, learning from the traditions of the Elamites, Assyrians, and Babylonians. The Persians settled in the region of Parsa, from which their name derives, and for centuries lived in the shadow of the Medes, until a young tribal leader named Cyrus, son of Cambyses I, would break that order and forever change the history of the region. Cyrus II, known as Cyrus the Great, was much more than a military conqueror. By unifying the Persians and subduing the Medes, he initiated what would become the Achaemenid Empire, the first great multicultural empire in history. In his campaigns of expansion, Cyrus didn't merely seize territories, he brought people together. His policy of religious tolerance and respect for local traditions allowed conquered regions to become, with relative ease, collaborators in the new empire. And with this integration came a key ingredient: trade. Building such a vast empire, stretching from Egypt to India, required more than armies or diplomacy. It demanded the constant flow of goods, food, raw materials, and information. To achieve this, commerce became the true backbone of Persian administration. Ancient trails were widened, bridges were built over once impassable rivers, and trading posts began to appear in strategic locations. It was the birth of a commercial system, both organized and remarkably advanced for its time. Even before the official paving of the Royal Road, which would later be constructed under Darius I, there already existed a complex network of trade routes used by merchants on foot, with pack animals, or in entire caravans. Along these paths, one could find exotic products from the banks of the Indus, rare perfumes from Egypt, crafted metals from Anatolia, fabrics from Phoenicia, and even ivory from East Africa. Each item carried not only economic value, but also stories, symbols, and whispers of distant lands. Persian society understood the significance of trade like few others. Cuneiform tablets found in ancient ruins contain detailed records of trade contracts, taxes collected along routes, lists of goods, and even correspondence between merchants and local governors. These documents reveal not only an efficient trading system, but also a mindset centered on organization, trust, and the movement of wealth. And so, when we look at the roots of commerce in the ancient Persian world, we see something far greater than simple exchanges of goods. We see the beginning of a network that connected peoples of different languages, religions, and customs. We witness the rise of an imperial mindset that understood the power of exchange, not only of products, but of ideas and values. And above all, we see how trade shaped the very DNA of the Persian Empire, laying the groundwork for the grand innovations that would come with its successors. And it is at this point in history, with the foundations of empire already laid, and the roads traced in the dust of deserts and the shadows of mountains, that we begin to understand how the Persians transformed the act of trading into an art of governance. But this is only the first page of a long journey. Amid the silence of the desert and the wind that sweeps across the slopes of the Zagros Mountains, a figure began to emerge with a force that would forever alter the contours of the known world. His name was Cyrus the Great, a title that few in history have carried with such deserved honor. For many, he was a conqueror, for others, a visionary. But for merchants, artisans, and scattered communities stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Indus Valley, Cyrus was something far greater. He was the man who turned trade into a bridge between civilizations and empire into a vast multicultural marketplace where gold flowed as freely as ideas. The rise of Cyrus was no mere twist of fate. Though he descended from Persian nobility, his lineage was not that of absolute kings. It was a time when alliances were forged by the sword, but maintained by intellect. When Cyrus rose against the Medes, who then dominated the region, he did so not merely out of ambition. He understood that tribal fragmentation hindered prosperity. Each isolated people was like an island surrounded by mountains, speaking different languages, following their own beliefs, cultivating their own goods, but never realizing the potential of an integrated network. And that was exactly what he set out to change. When he conquered the Median kingdom, Cyrus did not destroy it. He absorbed it. He appointed local governors, respected traditions, allowed religious practices to continue, and, most importantly, preserved the trade routes. Soon, merchants who had once faced tolls, hostile checkpoints, and constant risk began to find something new: safety. It was as if, under the new government, the ancient trails became the pulsing veins of a living organism beginning to take shape, the Achaemenid Empire. Cyrus's genius lay in his understanding that an empire could not endure through sharp swords or imposing walls alone. He saw the empire as a living body, where every people, every village, every product carried by camel or ship was an essential part of the whole. His dominion stretched across arid deserts, dense forests, fertile valleys, and vibrant cities. And in each of these places, he aimed to guarantee something fundamental: order, predictability, and flow. Flow of goods, of information, of people, and of trust. One of the greatest symbols of this new order was the liberation of the Jewish captives in Babylon. When Cyrus captured the city in 539 BCE, he did not impose Persian beliefs. On the contrary, he allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. This act, more than political, was a message to the world. Under Persian rule, there was space for all. And in a world of merchants, where trust and stability are as valuable as gold, such a policy rang out like a green light. It was safe to trade, safe to invest, safe to prosper. The ports of the Persian Gulf, the river routes crossing Mesopotamia, the sandy paths leading to Egypt or the Anatolian highlands, all these places began to connect as never before. Cyrus encouraged the construction of trading posts, grain storage facilities, open markets, and cities designed to welcome caravans. Markets were no longer mere places of exchange. They became centers of multicultural coexistence. And when people meet, they exchange more than goods. They share ideas, lifestyles, art, and knowledge. This process of commercial unification under Cyrus was so effective that even after his death, the foundations he laid continued to support the empire for centuries. His son, Cambyses II, and later Darius I, would go on to expand and consolidate Persia's economic and administrative structure. But it was Cyrus who planted the seed. He was the empire's gardener, wisely watering the fertile soil of cultural diversity. In practice, this meant that a Phoenician merchant could sell his fabrics in Susa while buying precious stones from Bactria. An Egyptian scribe could find papyrus imported from India while tasting dates grown in the heart of Persia. It was a web as vast as it was strong, interwoven with bridges of mutual respect, government protection, and a common currency that would soon standardize transactions across the territory. And if there is one symbol that best represents this spirit of connection created by Cyrus, it may well be the figure of the caravan driver. He, with his weathered turban, guiding camels through the desert, was not just a transporter of goods. He was a messenger of the empire, a link between cultures, a facilitator of peace through commerce. Wherever he passed, he carried the imprint of a new world in formation, a world where differences were not barriers, but shared treasures. Thus, the legacy of Cyrus the Great is not limited to military victories or proclamations etched on clay cylinders. His true achievement was in creating a space where civilizations could coexist under one roof, exchanging not only currency, but meaning. And in doing so, he shaped the spirit of an empire that would influence, directly or indirectly, all powers that came after it. But the construction of this system was still in its early stages, and it would be with Darius the First, the organizer, the supreme administrator of the empire, that Persian trade would reach its most remarkable sophistication. His reforms would transform the empire into an even more cohesive organism, where roads, time, and value would be measured with almost modern precision. When Darius the First ascended to the throne, the Persian Empire was already vast, powerful, and feared. But it was also dispersed, diverse, composed of dozens of peoples, languages, and local systems. What many saw as a threat to stability, Darius saw as a unique opportunity to consolidate, integrate, and transform that complexity into a flawlessly functioning network. If Cyrus had founded the empire on tolerance and unification, Darius would make it thrive through organization and control. And for that, there was no tool more powerful than trade. Under his reign, the act of exchanging goods became more than just an economic engine. It became a form of governance. Darius's first insight was that an empire without infrastructure was like a body without a circulatory system. The existing routes, many of them inherited from ancient kingdoms or mere informal caravan trails, needed to be transformed into secure, continuous, and efficient roads. Thus was born one of the greatest engineering feats of antiquity, the Persian Royal Road. Stretching approximately 2,700 kilometers, it connected the city of Susa, at the heart of the empire, to distant Sardis in Lydia, on the shores of the Aegean Sea. It was more than a road, it was a backbone. Along this monumental highway, regular rest stations were established where travelers could rest, feed their animals, and most importantly, exchange information. These stations also served as posts for the royal postal system, a remarkable innovation of the time. Mounted couriers, trained to ride day and night, could cover the entire length of the road in about 7 days, thanks to fresh horses at each stop. For the standards of the ancient world, this was an almost unbelievable achievement. This rapid communication allowed Darius to govern with precision, maintaining near real-time knowledge of events across the empire. But trade does not flow with roads alone. It also depends on trust, and Darius understood that trust is built through standardization. That's why one of his most impactful reforms was the creation of an official currency, the daric. Made of pure gold, with consistent weight and an imperial stamp, the daric became a recognized reference across the known world. For the first time, merchants who once relied on bartering or local coins could trade using a standard unit of value, respected from Babylon to India. The circulation of money facilitated contracts, reduced disputes, and expanded the scope of commerce. It was as if a common economic language was finally spoken among different peoples. In addition to the currency, Darius reorganized the empire's administrative structure into satrapies, or provinces governed by satraps. Each satrapy had relative autonomy, but was connected to the center through military and fiscal ties. This coordinated decentralization allowed for the efficient management of tax collection, calculated based on local production, including trade. Records of these collections were kept with impressive rigor. In Persepolis, for instance, thousands of clay tablets have been discovered, inscribed with cuneiform writings detailing worker payments, grain shipments, and the transport of goods. The Persian bureaucracy was vast but functional, a silent machine that kept the empire running. Another key pillar of Darius's trade policy was the construction of navigable canals and secondary routes. He ordered, for example, the the excavation of a canal linking the Nile to the Red Sea, anticipating the concept of the Suez Canal by more than 2,000 years. This allowed goods from the Mediterranean to reach the Indian Ocean without needing to sail around the African continent. The opportunities this opened were revolutionary for the time. Darius also invested in ports, shipyards, and the expansion of the Persian navy, turning maritime trade into a natural extension of the land routes. And it wasn't just the movement of goods that Darius encouraged. It was also the movement of people and knowledge. Egyptian artisans were recruited to work in Persian palaces. Greek merchants were granted permission to open markets in eastern cities. Caravans from India brought not only spices, but also stories and wisdom. Darius understood that the flow of ideas was just as precious as the flow of metal or fabric. And where ideas flow, something more powerful than profit is born: shared culture. To support this system with stability, security was an absolute priority. The royal road and its smaller branches were patrolled by the king's soldiers and inspectors, ensuring the routes were safe for all. From royal messengers to independent merchants, robbery and extortion were severely punished, as the emperor knew that order on the roads meant prosperity in his coffers. The Persian peace, the famed Pax Persica, was not just a political ideal, but a reality built with discipline, structure, and economic vision. It is striking to see how commerce, under Darius's rule, ceased to be a peripheral activity and became the center of imperial governance. Every road built, every coin minted, every warehouse raised, and every contract overseen contributed to an economic ecosystem that allowed the empire to survive, grow, and reinvent itself. It was a colossal machine in which every detail, no matter how small, had its precise function. And so, under the leadership of Darius I, the Persian Empire achieved a degree of economic and administrative integration never before seen. It was as if the entire empire pulsed in unison, guided by common laws, secure paths, and constant exchange. The commercial infrastructure he built did not merely support the empire, it was the empire. But for these routes to fully function, one had to understand their broader design, how they connected, what they transported, and what destinations they united. That is what we will explore next, as we journey along the roads that once crossed the ancient world, from west to east, from sea to mountains, carrying not just goods, but also stories, hopes, and the dreams of civilizations that, though different, learned to walk together. As one walks through the dusty expanses of antiquity, an observant traveler might notice something curious, that even in the farthest corners of the map, from arid plains to lush valleys, from steep hills to endless plateaus, there were always signs of human passage. Trails marked by footprints, remnants of caravans, fragments of pottery, forgotten coins. These were traces of what would become one of humanity's greatest achievements, the creation of routes that would unite cultures, empires, and eras. And nowhere was this project executed with such precision as in the Persian Empire under the reign of Darius I. In this vast multicultural territory, the Persian royal road emerged as the vital artery of an empire that breathed through commerce. It was not merely a road of stone and soil. It was a symbol of organized power and the administrative brilliance of an empire that early on understood that controlling physical space was also a way of controlling the economy and the soul of its people. Spanning more than 2,700 kilometers, the royal road connected the city of the Susa, in the southwest of present-day Iran, to Sardis, in western Anatolia, crossing plains, rivers, valleys, and mountains. Its route was no accident. It followed the ancient paths of Assyria, Lydia, and Media. In his wisdom, Darius did not destroy these routes, he refined them. Along the road, stations known as charkhan were built at regular intervals. At these stops, travelers could find rest, water, food, and above all, protection. These were also the places where messengers of the royal postal system would change horses for fresh ones, ensuring the continuity of their mission. The Greek historian Herodotus, who traveled through parts of the empire and recorded his impressions, was astonished by the speed with which messages were carried through this network. In a world without engines, satellites, or telegraph wires, The Persians created a communication system so efficient that even modern empires would take centuries to match it. But the royal road was only the backbone. Connected to it were hundreds of secondary roads, leading goods and travelers to destinations like Babylon, Persepolis, Ecbatana, Damascus, Gaza, Memphis, and even the distant city of Taxila in the Indus Valley. These branches formed a network of trade routes that transformed the empire into a living, pulsing mesh. At each crossroads, the ancient world converged. Armenians with horses, Egyptians with linen and papyrus, Indians with spices and ivory, Phoenicians with dyes and glass, Babylonians with grains and astronomical knowledge. Transport along these routes took many forms. Caravans of dozens of camels crossed desert stretches, while mules and horses dominated the mountainous areas. In river regions, boats glided along the Tigris, Euphrates, and smaller waterways, carrying heavy loads more swiftly. Each terrain required adaptation, and the Persians developed logistical solutions tailored to natural challenges. In extremely hot areas, shaded shelters and deep wells were built along the paths. In snowy regions, trails were marked with tall stakes and visual signs to help guide travelers. And what was transported along these routes? The variety was as vast as the empire itself. Gold and silver traveled from the mines of Lydia to the treasuries of Susa. Fine textiles and carpets moved from the Iranian plateau to the Mediterranean. Grains, dates, and oils flowed along internal routes to feed urban centers. Furs, dyes, perfumes, and ceramics circulated as luxury goods. But beyond products, something even more precious flowed through these roads. Information. News of wars, alliances, royal births, disease outbreaks, eclipses, all were transmitted from one corner to another, creating a collective awareness that united the edges of the empire in a single pulse. In the cities and trade posts along these routes, multicultural markets emerged where many languages were spoken and diverse traditions practiced. It was common for a Greek merchant to require a translator to negotiate with a caravan leader from Bactria, while Persian scribes oversaw contracts bearing official seals. In some of these centers, trade codes were even developed to standardize weights, measures, and customs fees. The imperial bureaucracy was extensive but functional. Tax records, tariff tables, passage permits, and market licenses ensured that commerce was regulated, secure, and above all, profitable for all parties involved. Another striking feature of the Persian roads was their diplomatic function. They served not only to move goods, but also to carry the ambassadors, scholars, artists, and religious figures. The roads became spaces of cultural and spiritual exchange. Along them traveled the earliest writings of Zoroastrianism, the beliefs of the Anatolian peoples, the philosophical ideas of India. Temples were erected along these routes, shrines received pilgrims, and faiths mingled, creating a rich and complex worldview that still echoes in the myths of the Middle East. Beyond the land routes, Darius also promoted the use of the maritime routes. In the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, and even the Red Sea, he understood that navigation was a faster means of connecting distant regions. Port cities like Tyre, Sidon, and Oman became vital centers for transporting valuable cargo such as rare stones, incense, timber, and exotic animals. Phoenician ships sailed under Persian flags, protected by treaties and naval garrisons, while Egyptian sailors were hired to steer vessels through treacherous straits. With all this, Darius's empire resembled a vast organism interconnected by nerves of stone, water, and sand. Every road that carried a sack of grain also carried a seed of culture. Every ship crossing a gulf brought with it a breath from other worlds. In this context, commerce became a way to expand imperial order without war, a war of enchantment, of need, of a shared desire for goods that transformed lives and united destinies. And so, while the world spun in its cycles of tension, the Persians traveled their roads with methodical calm. They understood that those who control the path control time, and those who control time shape the rhythm of history. The royal road was not just a route between cities. It was an invisible thread stitching together past and future, east and west, desire and fulfillment. But to fully understand this world of exchanges and connections, we must now meet its protagonists, the merchants, the goods they carried, the symbols they bore, and the secret roots shaped by humanity's eternal longing for beauty and belonging. Let us meet them. Amid the ebb and flow of caravans crossing the desert, beneath the jingle of bells on camel necks and the whisper of eastern winds, rose the enigmatic figures of the Persian merchants. Men and women who knew the empire's secret paths, the rhythms of the markets, the desires of the elites, and the needs of the farmers. They were the true lifelines of commerce. Their calloused hands touched both coins and manuscripts, silks and dreams, and it was through them that the most valuable goods of the ancient world flowed, like blood through the arteries of a living, breathing civilization. To be a merchant in Persia was not merely a profession. It was a way of life, an art of moving between worlds. Though often solitary travelers, they also belonged to a wide, structured, and respected community. Merchants did not simply sell. They negotiated, measured, observed, and reported. Many were literate, fluent in multiple languages, and carried in their minds intricate maps of the routes, price fluctuations, road hazards, and hidden opportunities in distant fairs. Their names often appeared in the tax records of satrapies, in temple contracts, and even in letters exchanged between governors and nobles. And what, after all, did they carry? Textiles were among the most sought-after items. Persia was famous for its finely woven carpets, rich in geometric and symbolic patterns that captivated buyers from Egypt to India. These carpets were not merely decorative, they were status symbols. Alongside them, silks, Egyptian linen, Indian cotton, and Median wool traveled smoothly along the empire's roads and through its ports. Fabrics perfumed with Eastern essences or dyed in rare pigments, such as the Phoenician purple, became mobile jewels, displayed in royal courts and ambassadorial halls. But commerce was not limited to aesthetics. Precious metals formed a solid foundation for trade. Gold from Lydia, tin from Armenia, silver from the Persian mountains, iron from Media. All were mined, smelted, shaped, and transported as ingots or finely crafted pieces. With them, coins were minted, jewelry made, weapons forged, and ritual instruments created. Markets buzzed when a new shipment of gold arrived. Prices fluttered like leaves in the wind, and rumors spread from oasis to oasis, shifting the economy through the mere perception of scarcity or abundance. Other goods, more subtle but no less valuable, also played key roles. Take incense, especially frankincense, from Arabia and East Africa, used in religious ceremonies, baths, and funeral rites. Its fragrance filled Zoroastrian temples and noble homes, becoming a symbol of status and spirituality. Myrrh, cinnamon, clove, and pepper, products from India and Southeast Asia, completed the aromatic palette of the empire. They were expensive, yes, but few items symbolized sophistication at a banquet more than the delicate presence of a rare spice. The list continues. Bactrian horses, prized for their strength and agility, sold for military and ceremonial use. Exotic woods, from the Caucasus, used in palace and ship construction. Phoenician glassware and jewelry, intricately detailed and time-resistant. Grains, especially barley and wheat, distributed to feed cities and imperial armies. Dried fruits, such as dates and figs, which served both as nourishment and as currency in the more arid regions. There were also items of symbolic value: amulets, idols, figurines, inscribed fabrics, religious and philosophical manuscripts. These objects traveled slowly, from hand to hand, carrying ideas, beliefs, and mysteries. A Zoroastrian scroll written in Aramaic might reach India and be reinterpreted by Brahmin priests. A symbol carved in Mesopotamian stone might become a talisman among Afghan shepherds. In this sense, trade was also a force of cultural transformation. But how were these exchanges conducted? Persian markets operated with remarkable organization. Many goods were sold at periodic fairs, held at crossroads or during religious festivals. Others were traded in fixed bazaars, overseen by local authorities, with stalls run by licensed merchants. Contracts were formalized with witnesses, clay seals, and standardized weights. The most important merchants had accountants, scribes, and guards, and traveled in caravans protected either by armed escorts or by prior arrangements with nomadic tribes. Payment varied. Imperial coins, like the Seggold darics, bullion, bartered goods, credit recorded on tablets, or even handwritten promissory notes honored across regions. Trust was the most valuable asset. A merchant known for honesty could trade without coin. Their word alone was enough. In times of crisis, droughts, wars, epidemics, product values shifted dramatically. Wheat might become more precious than gold, and a simple fabric more coveted than a jewel. The Persian economy, though partially centralized, was flexible and sensitive to the dynamics of the routes, harvests, and imperial rumors. In this context, the merchant was like a priest of daily life, one who read the signs, anticipated changes, and offered solutions. These goods did more than sustain cities and palaces. They created bonds between peoples, fostered interdependence, and cultivated a sense of belonging to something greater. A ceramic vessel molded in Susa could be used in a ritual in Thebes. Indian perfume carried on a Phoenician ship could be offered in a Lydian temple. Trade united kingdoms through beauty, necessity, and shared desire. And so, the Persian merchants, clad in traveling garments and guided by sharp eyes, became the silent architects of an economic order that would influence empires for centuries. In their hands rested the most precious goods of the ancient world. But they also held something even more enduring, the trust that, despite distances and differences, people would always find a way to connect through what they share, seek, and dream. And for this intricate web of exchange to flourish, more than roads and goods were needed. It required strategically positioned cities, functioning as the beating hearts of imperial commerce. Let us now enter them. Across the vastness of the Persian Empire, through rugged mountains, sun-scorched plains, and the silent banks of ancient rivers, rose cities that were more than just clusters of stone and clay. They were centers of convergence. In them, languages blended, markets pulsed with life, temples echoed with the voices of many gods, and the clang of artisans' hammers competed with the murmur of coins being weighed. These cities were the knots in the economic web-las of the Achaemenid Empire, points where routes crossed, goods flowed, and destinies were transformed. More than administrative capitals, they were the beating hearts of a commerce that moved not just wealth, but the very spirit of a multicultural civilization. Among them all, perhaps none embodied the grandeur of the empire more clearly than Waite Susa. Nestled between the Karkay and Des rivers, Susa was one of the oldest cities in the world, already flourishing long before the rise of the Persians. When Darius I adopted it as an administrative capital, it was completely remodeled. Its palaces, built with towering columns and glazed bricks, reflected the sun like cut gemstones. But beyond the royal splendor, Susa was a vibrant trade hub. Caravans unloaded their grains, gemstones, carpets, and ceramics there. Markets bustled with goods from the Indus Valley, Phoenicia, and Egypt. Imperial officials recorded everything: weights, contracts, taxes. And at night, beneath the shade of hanging gardens, merchants negotiated prices and sealed deals by the glow of oil lamps. Another city of monumental importance was Babylon. Even before Cyrus's conquest, it was a cultural and economic center without equal. But under Persian rule, its role expanded. Located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Babylon was the natural axis between East and West. With its strategic location and advanced urban infrastructure, it attracted not only merchants, but astronomers, scribes, engineers, and priests. Its massive walls protected warehouses full of grain, storerooms of precious metals, textile workshops, and currency exchange centers. The famous Ishtar Gate, which once saw religious processions pass through, also witnessed the constant flow of carts loaded with goods and people from across the empire. Commerce and the sacred walked side by side. Persepolis, though more often remembered for its ceremonial splendor, also played a key economic role. Built as a symbol of imperial unification, it was a meticulously planned city. Its grand staircases, carved reliefs, and monumental architecture told stories of submission and cooperation among peoples. Within its halls operated a highly detailed administrative system where thousands of clay tablets recorded wages, tributes, and transactions. Discovered centuries later, these records reveal an empire that paid workers based on merit, distributed rations by hierarchy, and managed inventories with almost modern precision. Persepolis was not only the face of the empire, it was its bureaucratic brain. To the north, in the mountains, Ekbatana Shahs offered a different kind of commercial center. Located in a milder climate, it was renowned for its luxurious textiles and served as a summer retreat for Persian kings. But its importance was not just seasonal. Ekbatana functioned as a link between the roots of the Caucasus, Central Asia, and the Persian heartland. Its markets attracted Armenian, Median, and Scythian traders. Rare metals were smelted there, gemstones cut, and spices sorted for redistribution. Its cosmopolitan character echoed in the accents, clothing, and flavors found in its fairs. Ekbatana showed that even far from the central thrones, commerce remained vibrant. In the far west, Sardis, in Lydia, marked the endpoint, or the beginning, of the royal road. It was a city of gold, both literal and symbolic. Long before the Persians, Sardis was the birthplace of the world's first metal coins. Under Achaemenid rule, Sardis preserved its minting tradition and became a military and economic base from which expeditions departed toward the Aegean and Mediterranean. It served as a gateway for Greek goods, olive oil, wine, ceramics, and marble artifacts, which found eager buyers in Persian markets. In return, incense, carpets, leather, dried fruits, and metals were sent westward. Life in Sardis echoed with the hammering of goldsmiths, the cries of auctioneers, and the scent of spices newly arrived from caravans that had crossed half the empire. Damascus, Gaza, Memphis, Taxila, the list of Persian commercial centers stretches like the branches of an ancient tree. Each had its own specialty: port, riverine, artisanal, agricultural, spiritual. But all were interconnected, functioning as part of a great coordinated system. The stability ensured by the Pax Persica allowed these centers to operate with predictability and safety, and that predictability was the fertile ground for economic flourishing. It's important to remember that these cities didn't exist solely for Persians. The empire was home to Egyptians, Jews, Greeks, Lydians, Babylonians, Scythians, Parthians, Hindus, and many others. Urban markets were also spaces of coexistence, learning, and mediation. Within them emerged interethnic partnerships, mixed commercial families, manuscript translations, exchanged agricultural techniques, and new fashions. The urban fabric mirrored the empire itself, diverse, dynamic, and interdependent. In the narrow stone alleys, the sounds of many languages intertwined like threads in a tapestry. Aramaic, Greek, Old Persian, Lydian, Egyptian. Different voices, yet all spoke the same language in the markets, that of value, need, and exchange. Even in the shadows of palaces or beneath temple arches, the echo of commerce could be heard. A new shipment of spices had arrived, a gold lot had been traded, a contract had been sealed. These commercial cities, with their unique rhythms, scents, colors, and sounds, were far more than dots on a map. They were living organisms that breathed the air of empire, absorbed its diversity, and returned wealth, knowledge, and culture. They allowed the Persian Empire to be not just a military power, but also an economic and civilizational beacon. And while armies marched and kings delivered speeches, the markets continued their eternal cycle of opening, exchange, and reinvention. But Persian commerce did not happen in isolation. It touched borders, it touched other empires. And in the next stage of our journey, we will see how this network of trade became entangled with the markets of Egypt, Greece, and India, creating an ancient world far more interconnected than we often imagine. The vastness of the Persian Empire was not merely a matter of territory. It was an extension of presence, of influence, of connections that echoed far beyond its administrative borders. Persian trade, like a silent yet irresistible tide, reached distant lands, slipped between neighboring empires, and touched the markets of the Mediterranean basin, and the trade routes of the Indian subcontinent. And it was precisely through these interactions, with Egypt to the south, Greece to the west, and India to the east, that the Persian economy became a transcontinental network of exchanges, ideas, and power. Let us begin with Egypt, one of the oldest kingdoms in the world, with established commercial traditions long before the rise of the Persians. When Cambyses II, son of Cyrus, conquered Egypt in 525 BCE, the pharaoh's throne began answering to Susa. But the Egyptian trade flow not only continued, it expanded. The Nile, backbone of Egyptian life, also became a supply channel for the empire. Grain, papyrus, fine linen, perfumes, and incense were transported on large vessels to Persian outposts, and from there carried overland deep into Asia. The economic integration was so deep that the Persians themselves began to adopt Egyptian techniques in irrigation, shipbuilding, and medicine. In Memphis and Sais, major Egyptian urban centers under Persian rule, bilingual markets thrived where scribes recorded contracts in both Demotic and Aramaic. Persian coins circulated alongside local weighing systems, forming a hybrid economy that blended Persian administrative pragmatism with Egyptian tradition. In Alexandria, which would rise a century later, this fusion would reach its peak, but the foundations had already been laid during Persian dominion. At the opposite end, turning westward toward the Hellenic world, the relationship between Persians and Greeks was marked by rivalry, yes, but also by intense commercial exchange. Long before the Greco-Persian Wars, Greek merchants had already ventured deep into Persian lands and Persians into Greek territories. Lydia, located in western Anatolia and integrated into the Achaemenid Empire, was heavily Hellenized. Cities like Ephesus, Miletus, and Halicarnassus, though culturally autonomous, were under Persian oversight and served as bridges for trade with mainland Greece. The goods exchanged between these civilizations reveal the depth of the connection. Olive oil, wine, painted ceramics, marble statues, and philosophical manuscripts flowed eastward from Greek cities. In return, they received Persian textiles, jewelry, incense, spices, horses, and gold. The Greeks deeply valued Eastern goods, seeing them as symbols of luxury and refinement. And the Persians, in turn, admired Greek artistic skill and mathematical reasoning, even employing Hellenic artisans to work on palaces in Persepolis and Susa. War did not entirely interrupt trade. It merely made it more discreet. Merchants continued operating under neutral flags, and trade endured through ports like Tyre, Sidon, and Rhodes. Moreover, many Greeks, such as Herodotus, traveled freely through the Persian Empire, documenting not only its political structure, but also its economic customs. Beneath the outward appearance of conflict, there was a silent admiration between the two worlds. Now, if there was one frontier where Persian trade flourished with complexity and depth, it was the East, India. Commercial contact with the Indian subcontinent dated back to before the Persian Empire's formation, but under Darius I, the Indus Valley was formally incorporated as a satrapy. They called it Hindush, and it was regarded as one of the wealthiest provinces in the empire. The annual tribute paid by India to Persia, recorded by Herodotus, was the largest of all subject peoples, and not without reason. From the Indus came rare spices, precious stones, cotton, exotic woods, animals like elephants and peacocks, as well as spiritual artifacts and philosophical manuscripts. The Indians, in turn, received Persian metals, textiles, horses, perfumes, and administrative techniques. Trade between Persia and India was not only lucrative, it was also spiritual. Contact with Hindu and Buddhist traditions influenced religious and cosmological practices in eastern Persia, especially in regions like Bactria and Arachosia, where cultural blending was strong. Routes between Persia and India included overland paths through Afghanistan, such as the famed Helmand Valley, and maritime routes across the Kazeh, Persian Gulf and Arabian Sea, linking Indian ports to Persian cities like Hormuz, Oman, and Suhar. In many of these ports, Indian communities settled, establishing bilingual trading quarters and temples dedicated to Hindu deities. It was the empire opening to the world, and the world opening to the empire. What is most striking about this entire web of interactions is that Persian trade was not about imposition. It was a key call to coexistence. The Persians did not colonize cultures. They integrated them. They understood that the strength of trade lies not in domination, but in interdependence. By allowing Greeks to keep exporting wine, Egyptians to cultivate papyrus, and Indians to teach their rites, the empire became more than just a collection of peoples. It became a plural organism, where each cell performed its function without losing its identity. And that is why, even after the fall of the Achaemenid Empire at the hands of Alexander the Great, the roots, the goods, and the commercial ties endured. Persian trade was not just a state practice. It was a culture, a network of trust, a symphony of mutual interests that continued for centuries, shaping the economic history of the ancient world. But not everything that was exchanged could be seen or counted in coins. Amid the bustling markets, there was a more subtle exchange of symbols, myths, beliefs, worldviews. In the next chapter, we will explore how Persian commerce was also a spiritual and cultural channel, through which ideas, gods, and philosophies traveled, reshaping how civilizations saw and related to one another. If there is something that transcends coins, goods, and contracts, it is the idea. Invisible, intangible, yet infinitely powerful, the idea travels farther than caravans, penetrates deeper than gold, and transforms more profoundly than any sword. And in the Persian Empire, a land between worlds, where diversity was not only tolerated, but integrated into the very fabric of governance, commerce was not only an exchange of goods, but of meanings. Along roads, fairs, ports, and outposts, symbols, mythologies, rituals, and worldviews were in motion. The empire was a network of intangible exchanges, and what flowed within it shaped not just the present, but the spiritual future of humanity itself. When we look at the Achaemenid Persia, we cannot ignore the presence of a religion which, though officially dominant, did not seek to crush others: Zoroastrianism. With roots that long predate the formation of the empire and formalized by Zarathustra, also known as Zoroaster, Zoroastrianism was adopted and promoted by Persian kings as a doctrine of cosmic order, where the eternal struggle between good and evil was the axis of existence. In this worldview, Ahura Mazda represented light, wisdom, and truth, while Angra Mainyu symbolized darkness, deceit, and chaos. Yet unlike other empires that imposed their beliefs, the Persians understood that true spiritual strength came from plurality and respect for the sacred in others. Thus, even as they promoted Zoroastrian fire temples, they also protected Egyptian sanctuaries, honored Babylonian rites, rebuilt Jewish temples, and allowed Greek and Hindu cults to flourish within their dominion. This openness turned the cities and markets of the empire into spaces of spiritual syncretism, where priests, scribes, and prophets exchanged not just goods, but narratives. Imagine, for instance, a Babylonian scribe conversing with a Persian sage about the origins of the universe, an Egyptian priest explaining to an Indian trader the soul's journey after death, or a Jew returning from Babylon with the Torah in hand, recounting in Hebrew stories he first heard in Aramaic. These encounters, made possible only because the roads, ports, and cities remained open, generated something new, a web of intertwined beliefs, where Zoroastrian fire found echoes in the Hindu concept of Dharma, and Greek myths resonated with Mesopotamian tales. In many commercial centers like Babylon, Susa, and Ecbatana, true laboratories of translation and preservation emerged. Texts were copied, translated, and annotated. Jewish scholars in Babylon reorganized their scriptures during exile, influenced by local culture. Greeks would later discover in the East philosophical sources that would inspire Stoic, Pythagorean, and even Platonic thought. Even the concept of ethical monotheism, so central to Judeo-Christian traditions, finds intriguing parallels in Zoroastrian theology. But this spiritual circulation was not limited to temples and libraries. In the markets, objects carried hidden meanings: amulets, statuettes, fabrics with sacred symbols, engraved vessels, perfumes for rituals, and stones associated with deities. All were part of daily commerce. A simple pendant sold by a Phoenician might serve as divine protection in an Egyptian home. A wooden figurine brought from India might be placed on a Persian altar. Thus, objects became vehicles of the invisible, carriers of belief traveling alongside their material form. And then there was oral transmission. Storytellers, known by many names, Gushnav, Hikayatun, or simply wanderers, carried in memory myths, epics, and parables. They told their tales in plazas, taverns, and caravanserais, blending reality with legend, history with metaphor. And in their words, ideas took flight. A fable about Persian justice could arrive in Egypt as a moral lesson. An Indian story about reincarnation could become a parable about destiny in the markets of Anatolia. Thus, the empire became a space of continuous reinterpretation. Festivals were another symbolic point of convergence. Persian sacred dates, such as Nowruz, the Zoroastrian New Year, brought together people from across the empire in celebrations that, while rooted in Persian tradition, welcomed foreign rites. During such festivities, typical foods were shared, dances performed, songs sung, prayers offered. It was as if the empire had understood that beyond controlling territory, it needed to connect hopes. And faith, in all its forms, was an expression of those hopes. This symbolic exchange also appeared in art and architecture. The reliefs of Persepolis depict diverse peoples bringing tribute, yet wearing their own garments, their distinct features preserved. Persian palaces, though built according to royal tastes, displayed Egyptian, Median, Babylonian, and Urartian influences. The empire was a mosaic, and its aesthetics made this clear, that a beauty of difference gathered in harmony. Even after the empire's fall, these exchanges echoed onward. Persian religious thought would influence Manichaeism, Gnosticism, and even certain currents of early Christianity. Persian religious tolerance would be remembered by the Romans, reinterpreted by Enlightenment philosophers, and even cited in modern documents on civil rights. The spiritual legacy of Persian commerce is not only in archaeological archives, but also in many ideas we now consider universal. The trade of ideas, beliefs, and symbols may have been the most enduring of all. While carpets wore out, metals oxidized, and perfumes faded, the stories, worldviews, and ethical principles endured. They spread to neighboring civilizations, merged into new systems, and inspired new empires. And it all began in the corridors of markets, in the conversations of merchants, in the gestures of respect exchanged between cultures. But the empire, like all things human, would one day meet its limits, and even with all its grandeur, it would watch the very roads that once empowered it become paths of invasion and downfall. In the next chapter, we will follow that decline and understand how the arrival of Alexander the Great reshaped the map of Persian power and economy. In the distance, a new sound began to echo along the once silent roads of the empire. It was not the jingle of caravans, nor the chants of merchants, nor the whispers of deals being struck in the markets. It was the sound of Macedonian armor marching, the thunder of swift cavalry, the breathless surge of conquest sweeping through deserts, mountains, and walled cities. It was the harbinger of the end of an era. For although the roads remained open, and markets still sold textiles, metals, and perfumes, something had begun to shift. The arrival of Alexander the Great was not just a change of rulers, it was the rupture of a balance, and with it, Persian commerce entered its twilight. For 2 centuries, the Achaemenid Empire had woven a trade network that united the known world. With solid infrastructure, protected routes, standardized currency, and respect for diversity, commerce had flourished almost organically. But that balance, vast as it was, had a vulnerable core. It depended on political cohesion. As that cohesion began to unravel, everything else weakened with it. Corruption in some satrapies, moral decay among certain kings, internal struggles for the throne, and regional revolts, all these slowly eroded the empire's foundations. And it was into this climate of instability that Alexander advanced. In 334 BCE, Alexander of Macedon launched his campaign against the Persians, crossing the Hellespont with a small but disciplined army driven by a grand vision. to unite East and West under a single crown. His campaign was marked by swift, devastating victories. Granicus, Issus, Gaugamela, names that came to symbolize the downfall of a millennia-old empire before a new kind of force. But the impact was not only military. With every conquered city, the Persian administrative system was dismantled or absorbed, and with it, the gears of commerce fell out of sync. The once protected routes became dangerous. Caravans departed less frequently. Tax posts were shut down. Hostile tribes, once restrained by treaties and patrols, began attacking convoys. The postal system was abandoned, and with it, market communication grew erratic. The gold daric, once a symbol of economic stability, began to vanish, replaced by Greek coinage. Trade did not cease, but it lost its imperial structure, its rhythm, its harmony. Alexander, for his part, did not overlook Persia's economic value. On the contrary, he was fascinated by the treasure he discovered in Susa, Persepolis, and Babylon. It's estimated that he seized hundreds of tons in gold and silver, a fortune that would fund campaigns and monumental projects for decades. But such plunder was a clear sign of change. What had once supported markets now became spoils of war. What had once been investment in trade routes and outposts now served military power and personal prestige. The destruction of Persepolis. Perhaps the most symbolic act of this decline was more than the fall of a capital. It was the burning of administrative archives, tax records, contracts, ration logs, thousands of tablets documenting the empire's economy. Though Alexander attempted to justify the fire as revenge for Persia's past attacks on Greece, the act resounded as the end of an era of governance grounded in diversity and peaceful commerce. And yet it would be unfair to say that Alexander destroyed everything. In many cities he preserved and even encouraged commerce, founding Hellenic markets, reorganizing routes, and promoting cultural exchange. The creation of cities like Alexandria in Egypt, Alexandria Ariana, and Alexandria Eshate was, in part, an effort to restore the trade network under new leadership. But the nature of commerce changed. Persian trade, once rooted in balance and respect for local traditions, began to take on a more cultural dominance. Greek became the language of business. Market architecture shifted. The focus turned toward the Christ, Greek Macedonian center, marginalizing the once central Persian hubs. Furthermore, Alexander's empire was a giant with feet of clay. After his untimely death in 323 BCE, without a prepared heir, his realm fractured among his generals, the so-called Diadochi, who fought one another for decades. This new era of political fragmentation made it impossible to reconstruct the former commercial system. The satrapies became autonomous Hellenistic kingdoms, introducing each new borders, new tariffs, new currencies, and hindering the free, protected flow of goods once ensured by the Persian kings. Still, the roots did not vanish. Like old riverbeds dried under the sands of time, they remained, waiting for new empires to reawaken them. And indeed, centuries later, the Parthians, and eventually the Sassanids, would inherit these structures and revive transcontinental trade, though never with the same level of integration, stability, and cultural respect that had defined the Achaemenid era. Thus, the legacy of Persian commerce did not end. It merely slumbered. It lived on in the names of cities, in the practices of merchants, in the traditions of Eastern markets. The idea that trade could be a bridge between worlds, and not just a tool for domination, would continue to inspire. In every caravanserai that later emerged along the Silk Roads, in every standardized coin minted by a later empire, in every trade treaty built on mutual trust, the spirit of ancient Persian commerce still echoed. And perhaps the most fascinating truth is that even its fall, even its decline, revealed the depth of what had been built. For what disappears and leaves longing behind, leaves a mark. Alexander conquered the empire, but he did not erase its model. He merely transformed it, and in doing so, proved how strong it had been. Now, with the end of the Achaemenid era and the roads buried under the dust of change, we turn our eyes to the future. For though the empire has fallen, its ideas and its commercial structures would go on to shape the next great network of the ancient world, the Silk Roads. And it is there that the Persian legacy would find new life. Even after palaces crumbled, empires changed hands, and the names of kings were forgotten, the roads remained. Paths do not disappear. They simply change their use, their language, their purpose. The roads built by Persian kings, the outposts raised in the scorching sands, the coins minted with divine symbols, and the contracts sealed in clay did not vanish with the fall of the Achaemenid Empire. They transcended their time, becoming the silent foundations of a new era of exchange, the era of the Silk Roads. For centuries, the geographic space that had once been the heart of the Persian Empire remained the logistical core of the Old World. There, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, between the Iranian plateaus and the steppes of Central Asia, a bridge formed between West and East. If merchants from Greece and Rome wished to reach India or China, it was through these routes, many of them direct heirs of Persian roads, that they had to pass. The old royal roads of Darius, even without their original postal systems or military patrols, served as the backbone of commercial flows between civilizations throughout late antiquity and the Middle Ages. Under the Parthians, c. 247 BCE, 224 CE, indirect heirs of the Persians, Persia regained a central position in Eurasian trade. Though less centralized than the Achaemenids, the Parthians were skilled diplomats and route controllers. They understood that wealth lay in tolls, taxes on goods, and tribute from trade posts. And so, they reactivated segments of the royal road, established caravanserais, and maintained just enough security for caravans to traverse great distances. Through their efforts, trade with Rome, India, and even China flourished once again. It was during this time that the Silk Roads began to take their most recognizable form. Silk left China, passed through Turkestan, descended through the mountains of Bactria, and crossed the Iranian plateau before reaching Antioch, Damascus, or Alexandria. In return, the West offered glass, jewels, wines, precious metals, and manuscripts. At the center of it all were ancient Persian cities, Susa, Ecbatana, Hekatompilos, Ragay, now serving as advanced outposts of a nascent global commerce. What made these places thrive, even centuries after the Achaemenid zenith? The answer lies in the invisible yet powerful legacy left by the Persians, a cultural and commercial infrastructure. The Persians had taught the world the value of standardized weights and measures, trustworthy coinage, institutional protection of trade, and the coexistence of diverse peoples and beliefs under shared rules. These ideas survived because they worked, and later civilizations adopted them with quiet reverence. During the era of the Sassanid Empire, 224–651 CE, this legacy was amplified. Considered by the Persians themselves as restorers of Achaemenid glory, the Sassanids heavily invested in roads, fortresses, canals, and ports. They reactivated old markets and founded new ones, like Ctesiphon, which became one of the largest urban and economic centers of the ancient world. There, Chinese, Arab, Indian, Greek, and Armenian merchants met to trade goods, forge alliances, and exchange ideas. As before, trade was not merely material. It carried farther philosophical manuscripts, medical treaties, religious rites, and artistic traditions. Zoroastrianism, preserved under the Sassanids, echoed the ancient spirit of coexistence. Though the empire was officially Zoroastrian, there was, to varying degrees, room for Nestorian Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, and even Manichaeans. This diversity enabled trade. A Syrian Christian merchant could safely negotiate in a Persian city, just as an Indian Buddhist could find hospitality in a monastery nestled in the Iranian mountains. The routes also extended through the Persian Gulf, where ports like Hormuz and Siraf became vital centers of maritime trade with India, Yemen, East Africa, and later China via the Indian Ocean. The Persian model of commerce, integrating land and sea routes, state presence, and religious diversity, was absorbed by many successor empires, including the Islamic one. When Islam emerged in the 7th century, The Arabs adopted many of the Persian trade practices and expanded them, ushering in a new phase of medieval globalization. During the Islamic era, many cities that had been major Persian trade hubs were reborn as pillars of Muslim commerce. The Persian language itself remained a prestigious cultural and commercial language across the Middle East for centuries, used in contracts, poetry, scientific treatises, and merchant records. The architectural style of bazaars, the organization of caravanserais, the use of tax tables, and the regulation of markets all had roots in the ancient Persian model, now adapted to new beliefs and new eras. And so, Persian commerce became a subterranean current of history, invisible to hurried eyes, yet essential to the cohesion of empires and the flourishing of cultures. Carpets continued to be woven, now not only as luxury items, but as carriers of stories. Routes were still traveled, now bearing Chinese porcelain, spices from Java, gold from Nubia, and manuscripts from Baghdad. The Persian legacy was present in every step of those caravans, in every scroll unrolled, in every coin exchanged under the desert sun. Perhaps most astonishing is the realization that this legacy did not disappear with modernity. Even today, the old Silk Roads and commercial centers of Iran and the Middle East continue to reflect the principles laid down by the Persians. Solid infrastructure, respect for diversity, mobility incentives, balance between tradition and innovation. Wherever there is a vibrant marketplace, a bridge between cultures, a trustworthy currency, and a shared language, there still lives the luminous shadow of an empire that taught the world how to unite people through trade, not war. But how do we know all this? How do we understand the details of these trades, these routes, these coins and merchants who vanished millennia ago? The answer lies in what the earth has preserved: inscriptions, tablets, archaeological artifacts, ancient texts. And through them, we now dive into the backstage of memory. In the deserts of Iran, among the ruins of palaces buried by time, between fragments of forgotten pottery and clay tablets that have withstood millennia of silence, lie the clues to an ancient world that, though vanished from the surface, continues to pulse beneath our feet. It is through the delicate hands of archaeology, the patience of epigraphers, and the insatiable curiosity of historians that we begin to reconstruct what, for centuries, existed only as an echo: the concrete workings of Persian commerce, its reach, its organization, and its soul. The rediscovery of Persian civilization did not happen all at once. For a long time it was seen only through the eyes of its conquerors. The accounts of Herodotus, for instance, though valuable, are often filtered through his Greek perspective, distorting details in favor of the exotic. But as systematic excavations began, particularly from the late 19th century onward, a new image emerged, that of an empire extremely sophisticated, meticulous, organized, and deeply committed to the functioning of trade. One of the most remarkable discoveries came from Persepolis, the sacred and administrative city founded by Darius I. There, thousands of clay tablets written in Elamite, Akkadian, and Aramaican were found, carefully stacked, protected beneath collapsed structures. Known as the Persepolis Archives, these records reveal intimate details of the empire's economic daily life. They include payment logs for workers, especially those involved in palace and canal construction, grain distribution records, stock controls, transport routes, names of suppliers, and even references to wages paid in food or textiles instead of coins. These tablets are not cold documents. They are mirrors of a living society. Through them, we learn that women worked and were paid, that entire communities were organized around commercial tasks, that a well-structured logistics chain moved goods across the empire, and more. There was institutional trust, robust enough to record, monitor, and redistribute wealth in a centralized and transparent manner. The Persian economy was much more than product exchange. It was a living system of control, administration, and long-term planning. Beyond Persepolis, excavations in Susa, Ecbatana, and other key cities revealed a wealth of coins, cylinder seals, stone weights, and commercial tools. The fossils in particular demonstrate the care taken with contracts. They were used to authenticate agreements, mark goods, shipping crates, and commercial letters. Each seal was unique, often inscribed in 3 languages and adorned with symbolic images indicating the origin, owner, or contents. These artifacts show an empire where commerce was supported not just by personal trust, but by a robust institutional apparatus. The coins tell their own story. The famous gold daric, minted by Darius I, was renowned for its purity and consistent weight. Its design, depicting the king armed, a symbol of power and stability, served as both propaganda and a guarantee of value. Because they have been found not only in Persian lands, but as far as Greece, Egypt, and Central Asia, we know this coin was widely accepted, functioning almost like an ancient dollar. Alongside the daric, there were silver and copper coins used for smaller transactions, indicating a sophisticated monetary economy segmented by social class and market level. Another key archaeological source lies in the royal inscriptions, such as those at Behistun, Nakshi Rustam, and within Persepolis itself. These inscriptions, though often extolling military victories and royal legitimacy, also highlight civil achievements: roads, canals, irrigation systems, markets, and trade posts. The way Persian kings presented themselves, as providers of order, justice, and abundance, is deeply tied to the image of a government that prioritized commerce. Discoveries have not been limited to Persian soil. Archaeologists working in Greek islands, Babylonian ruins, Phoenician markets, Egyptian ports, and Indian cities have found evidence of trade with the empire. Persian pottery fragments in Athens, darics buried in Alexandria, Aramaic administrative texts in Silk Road oases, all confirm the vast reach of this commercial network. Even in the caves in China, textiles and jewelry bearing Persian stylistic elements have been found, suggesting that the trade routes established during the Achaemenid era were indeed precursors to the classical Silk Roads. Another silent treasure is the historical memory preserved in later traditions. Islamic-era Persian and Arab writers such as Al-Tabari and Al-Biruni refer to Persian trade with reverence, holding the Achaemenids as models of wise administration. Jewish and Armenian chroniclers also cite the Persian period as a time of stability for commerce. The memory of this empire was etched not only in stone and metal, but also in the oral and literary traditions of the civilizations that followed. More recently, technologies such as satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and AI-assisted archaeology have enabled the reconstruction of lost routes, revealing occupation patterns that align with ancient descriptions of Persian roads. These studies confirm what historians had long suspected, that the empire did not merely dominate space, it organized it with remarkable precision, tailored to commercial integration and the circulation of goods and ideas. And so, stone by stone, shard by shard, word by word, the commercial past of the Persian Empire is being reassembled before us, not as an ancient myth, but as a complex, functional, and deeply human reality. Each object found, each inscription deciphered, each structure unearthed by time tells us of a people who understood, earlier than most, that prosperity is born from exchange, circulation, and coexistence. But now that we have explored the roads, the kings, the markets, the products, the symbols, and the records, one final question remains. What does all this teach us today? What is the true legacy, not archaeological, but philosophical, of Persian commerce? That is the reflection with which we will end our journey. When we look at the past through the lens of time, what we see is not just ruins, ancient maps, or names etched in stone. What we glimpse, if we look closely, is the essence of who we are, connected beings, driven by the need to communicate, exchange, understand, and come closer. At the heart of every Persian market, every road drawn between mountains, every caravanserai raised under the starry sky, pulsed a silent yet eternal truth. Humanity only thrives when it meets itself. Trade in the Persian world was not merely an economic activity. It was a philosophy of life. A vision that saw in the other not a threat, but a possibility. That viewed cultural differences not as obstacles, but as bridges. That understood that peace, True, lasting, fruitful peace is not won by spears, but by trust. The Persians built an empire not only with armies, but with roads, contracts, seals, coins, and markets. And in doing so, they taught us that true power lies in the ability to connect diverse worlds under a shared logic of mutual respect and collaboration. Interconnectedness was not a coincidence. It was a project, a purpose. When Darius built the Royal Road, he didn't just want to shorten distances. He wanted to create an invisible mesh where ideas, products, and peoples could circulate freely. When the kings allowed the simultaneous existence of Zoroastrian temples, Babylonian sanctuaries, Jewish synagogues, and Hindu shrines, they weren't merely tolerating diversity. They were embracing the complexity of the human world, understanding that stability is born from integration, not uniformity. It's easy to think of trade as something cold, calculated, aimed only at profit. But in the Persian Empire, it was also warmth, encounter, and hope. A tunic brought from India was not just fabric. It was the result of hands that wove, eyes that chose color, stories told beside the loom. A Phoenician vase sold in Susa carried with it centuries of nautical knowledge, artistic tradition, and religious practices. A seal impressed on a clay tablet was more than a mark of ownership. It was a pact of trust, an agreement that between distant peoples, something could be shared. And perhaps this is the true legacy of Persian commerce. The realization that behind goods lie invisible bonds between human beings. That every exchange is, in truth, a form of recognition. That every contract is a gesture of faith. That every road, no matter how arid, is an invitation to meet. Looking at the present, it's impossible not to see that we are still walking similar roads. Our markets are now digital. Our contracts live in the cloud. Our currencies are made of code. But the principle remains the same. When we buy something from another country, we repeat the gesture of a Persian merchant reaching out to a stranger. When we translate books, export culture, and share knowledge, we retrace the same paths of connection that once ran between Babylon and Taxila, between Sardis and the Indus Valley. And when we speak of globalization, innovation, and intercontinental networks, we rarely remember that all of this already existed, in surprisingly advanced form, at the heart of the ancient Persian Empire. They showed us that it is possible to build an empire without erasing cultures, an economy without destroying diversity, a road that not only carries wealth, but also returns dignity. At the end of this journey, one lesson remains. The story of Persian commerce is, above all, a story of human connection, of how men and women, separated by mountains, languages, and beliefs, found ways to cooperate, of how interdependence is more natural than isolation, of how true wealth lies not just in gold, but in trust, curiosity, and the courage to open oneself to the unknown. And perhaps in a world today fragmented in so many directions, we might turn our gaze to the past, not as an escape, but as a beacon. May the ancient roads inspire us to chart new ones. May the markets of Susa teach us how to listen. May the clay seals remind us of the value of a given word. And may the Persian spirit, the one that saw trade as a bridge, not a wall, continue to whisper its lessons between the pages of history and the eternal winds of the desert.